Hi guys and welcome to HOMAGE. A few days back I did a first impressions video on this little beauty, the San Martin BB58 HOMAGE, and here's the whole review. And in that video a lot of people asked me how it were, if it was maybe a bit too big, and especially they wanted to know how it compared to the vintage diver. Even though I threw a bit of footage on that video, here we're going to be comparing it quite a bit with the vintage diver, so you can make a choice, because these two watches look very much alike. However, they do wear very differently because of their different sizes basically. So I will be going through the advantages and disadvantages of this one, and I will be comparing that with the vintage diver. And someone also asked me to compare it and to see if it wore like the Water Ghost. So I'm going to be, to a lesser degree, comparing it to the Water Ghost as well. Besides from that, I'm going to be giving you a lot of close-ups. We're going to be talking about the lume and the lume endurance tests, and I'm going to be giving you my final thoughts about this watch. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get right into it. So let's start with the comparison of these two watches. Let's start with dimensions. On the site it says 40 for the BB58 against 39 for the vintage diver. However, to be precise, the dimensions are a bit different. I measure the BB58 at 40.5 millimeters in diameter by 11.3 millimeters in thickness. That is wonderful. By 47.8 in lug to lug, by 54.7 in end link to end link. That's a huge one, and that's basically what most people are worried about. The lug width is of course 20 millimeters, and the bracelet at the case is 20 millimeters, and it tapers down to 16.5 at the clasp, and then it goes back up on the clasp at 18.2 millimeters. The vintage diver, that is 39 millimeters in diameter. If you flip the watch around and you measure the diameter of the case itself, it is 38 millimeters, so it does wear smaller. You've got a thickness of 12.8, so that is significantly thicker than the BB58, and that is mostly because of the very pronounced domed sapphire crystal. And you've got a lug to lug of 45.7, so almost 2 millimeters smaller. And even though here you also have male end links, you have got an end link to end link measure of 51.6, much smaller than what you get on the BB58. You also have a lug width of 20, and the bracelet tapers from 20 to 16.3, and at the clasp I measured it at 18.1, so pretty much exactly the same. One of the subscribers asked me as well to measure the height of the bezel, because it was his impression that it was thicker than the one on the original BB58. And I must say that it's at 2.2 in thickness. So not only you have the dimensions, but also you have the front of the watches that are quite different. You've got the modern San Martin hexagon logo, and you've got that beautiful vintage calligraphy. Of course, the hands are different. The vintage diver does have the classic Mercedes hands, as the BB58 has of course a snowflake Tudor hands. Apart from that, and faithful to the BB58, the San Martin has indices that are surrounded by metal rings, and faithful to the vintage Rolexes, the vintage diver just has painted lume. The dials are almost the same diameter at 28 millimeters, but there's a visual trick in here. You see that the BB58 looks bigger. It's because rehaut on the vintage diver slopes at an angle like that and makes it that the actual dial is smaller than the one on the BB58. It might be smaller, I don't know, there's no way to measure it. but it might be smaller by a 2 to 3 millimeters, which makes a big visual difference in any case. That is number one. And number two, you've got a bezel insert thickness that is much larger on the Black BB58 than on the Vintage Diver. See, on the Vintage Diver, it looks very, very thin. So all of this combined makes it that even though on paper these watches are supposed to be 1 millimeter apart, the Black BB58 wears much, much larger. And I don't know if you can see in this shot, but it does look much larger, and you will see on wrist, that is confirmed on wrist. Take a look at how the Black BB58 wears. That is quite large on my wrist. The large dimension is especially large on the end link to end link. Almost 55 millimeters makes this a behemoth. Those end links do come down dramatically to hug your wrist. Even so, it is quite a large size to accommodate to a medium to small size wrists. Those of you with 7 and more inch wrists will not have a problem, but with us with smaller wrists, it does look a bit big. The Vintage Diver with that 45.7 in log to log and that 51.6 in end link to end link is much more manageable for medium to small size wrists. Otherwise, the clasps on these two are virtually identical with the same number of adjustments. You've got 4, that is pretty good, and you've got pretty much the same screw down system to adjust your bracelet. You have got screw down links, and they are made in a way that looks like you have got rivets, but they are not real rivets, they're screws. And strangely enough, the ones on the Vintage Diver are a bit larger than the ones on the Black BB58. I don't like those 4 rivets personally. I think they were useless on the Vintage Diver, and I understand them on the Black BB58 Homage because the original from Tudor does have those rivets, as those 4 rivets as well, but that doesn't mean that I like them. But anyway, it's understandable. The other thing that is different in these models will be the movement, and that is a pretty big point of contention, because on the Vintage Diver you've got the true and tested but slower beat Seiko NH35, when on the Black BB58 you have got the more expensive and higher beat PT5000, and the PT5000 is a Chinese clone of the ETA 2824, and that can make some people doubtful. However, this movement, although it's pretty new at 10 years old, is very well regarded, and that is because a version of this movement was sent for test at the equivalent of the COSC in Germany, and it performed pretty much within COSC. So that is why this movement is very well regarded. However, we do not have enough data. 10 years is not enough to say if this is a wonderful movement or not. If you want to see more about the Vintage Diver, I will leave a link on the full review right here. And that PT5000 might be still kind of an unknown quantity. Look at how it performs beautifully. Well, with that comparison done, let's now focus more on this one. So I gave you the dimensions, you know about the movement, you know about many things. Let's check how the bezel rotates. It rotates very, very well. There's no backplay whatsoever, and the rotation is crisp and precise. This is really a very good rotation. San Martin has accustomed us to pretty good rotation, but some people complain that it's a bit too hard sometimes and that it might hurt them even. For example, the Vintage Diver, see, the rotation is much more clicky, and you need to apply more force to rotate it. That doesn't mean that the bezel is necessarily more secure. They do feel as secure on one and the other, But on the Black Bay 58 Homage, it's just that it's much easier to rotate. Then let's check this watch in regards to quality. We already checked how the bezelins are turned, that was wonderful. Let's check how San Martin have made the few details of this watch, and we'll go to macro, and you see on the dial that the hexagon, the hand, the hour, the minute, the second hand, and all the dials are very, very, very well made. You do see some particles and some defects here and there, but they're really rare, and I believe that at this price point it is really amazing that they can do such stuff and that they take such attention to detail. Let's talk price, because that was also a pretty contentious point about this watch. And this watch costs around 278 euros, which is quite a lot of money, especially for the price point that San Martin has gotten us used to. So I have set this camera to the highest the ISO will go, and we're going to compare this watch with the Vintage Diver and also with the Rolex and the Seiko Monster. So let's see what happens here. We're going to charge the watches with my studio lights. Let's scale the lights and I'll see you back in 20 minutes. Alright, so at the end of the video we can see pretty good results for the little Black Bay 58 Homage. We can see the Vintage Diver to the left, that is the least visible, followed by maybe the Rolex. Second best would be the Black Bay 58, so Homage, so very good regarding that, and the best would be the Seiko Monster to the right. Something that I wanted to leave very clear, because the issue arose, is that the cases of these two watches are not the same at all. Or maybe they are shaped the same, but they are very different. This is a reduced version of this one. The case, and I'm talking just about the case of the Vintage Diver, is 38 millimeters in diameter, when the case of the Black Bay 58 Homage is 40.5, so quite a big difference. There's those other dimensions that I spoke about that show you that these cases are not the same cases. However, they are very similar in shape. I would say, however, that when you look at them from the side, from their flanks, the one on the Black Bay 58 just comes down dramatically at the end of the log, when the one on the Black Bay Homage just continues a bit more the line and comes back and slopes down more gently. So again, these are not the same cases, not at all. Look at the dimensions, look about the shape. At the end of the logs, they are not the same cases. Even the back of the watches are different, and you can see the difference when you look at them from the side. Strangely enough, those teeth are much more pronounced on the Vintage Diver than on the Black Bay Homage, where they are very discreet. However, the similarities are on the finishing. You have the same vertical finish on the flanks of the watch. You have the same beautiful bevel to separate the front from the sides of the watch. However, you have got a different brushing. You have got a circular brushing on the Black Bay 58, and you have got a vertical brushing on the Vintage Diver. Another point of difference will be those domed sapphire crystal. Look at the dome on the Vintage Diver. It is a very highly pronounced dome, making a beautiful effect. And it's a single dome, that is why you have all that distortion there that some people like. The crystal on the Black Bay 58 by comparison is thin, One thing that had people scratching their heads about is that protruding male end link. This makes a huge end link to end link dimension, and even though it does slope very much, as you can see there, the impression is still there of a very, very large watch, when it is actually not that large. And I discovered that when I put the watch on a strap. And it's a Horween strap, the one that came on the 6105, and you will find a review of that one in here. And when I put it on that strap, it made sense. It looked much smaller, and it made me think that the watch would have looked wonderful for smaller wrists with a female end link. I do hope that San Martin gives us an option with a female end link very soon. If you would like to see that, do let me know in the comments so I can tell them, so they can read it, and I can tell them that people are craving for female end links. Remember that the good thing with these Chinese companies is that they listen to feedback and they implement it very quickly. I tried other straps, among which the very nice strap from the Water Ghost, but it did fit, but the fit wasn't perfect. Alright, and some other people asked me to compare it with the Water Ghost, and I think they were, let's say, pretty similar, but for the bracelet. The Water Ghost is a bit thicker at 12.6, but it does have, the watches do have about the same diameter. The Water Ghost, I measured at 41 and the Black BB58 at 40.5, but the end link to end link for the Water Ghost with that beautiful bracelet is just at 49.7, so half a centimeter shorter than the Black BB58. However, when you wear them on straps, they do feel quite similar, but for the fact that the lugs on the Water Ghost are much thicker. So it does feel like a bit of a more substantial watch. So let's sum up the watch. This SN008 is another home run from San Martin, if you ask me. They had a bit of a bad time with their GMTs, which were a bit too expensive, but here with this one, they do make up for it. The quality is superb, that bezel rotation is very, very nice, the finishing is all that you can expect from San Martin. The price might be a bit too steep for some, and that is in part due to the inclusion of the PT5000 movement. Remember that the NH35 is about $30 and the PT5000 is about 80, so the difference might be there. Another very compelling offer from San Martin. For the larger wrists though, and of course that at some point you will have to decide. It might be up to your wrist size. I prefer myself the vintage diver, but that is because my wrist size is smaller. But in any case, a very, very good watch, a very compelling watch, and one that I recommend you totally. That's been the review. Thank you again so much for watching, and thank you for the big support on the initial impressions video. I'll be seeing you very soon. Goodbye.